Yes, I'm Stefan Dräger, the fifth generation leading Drägerwerk, a German-based company, which is now 127 years old. I'm an electrical engineer by education, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you for coming.
My name is Ed Cantwell. I'm the executive director and founder of the Center for Medical Interoperability. Founder meaning convinced some very gracious people to give it a try. I don't come from a healthcare background. I come from an aviation background with some experience flying fighter aircraft. So interoperability to me is a life safety issue, but in a different way. It's been fun to apply that mentality to this challenge.
Would you mind just a little bit more, talk about what your group is doing, who they're representing, because I think many people here may not be familiar with the Center for Medicare Interoperability, Ed.
So Joe doesn't know this, but we decided to form this center the day his press release came out about the data pledge. Wow. And the Gary and Mary West, who backed it, said, do you need to do it? The work's done. And so we sat down with Gary and said, well, if data is made available and there's not a platform to consume it that's trusted by patients and health systems, then it's just data. So, our commitment, my commitment, I think we're strong enough now to do this because we formed shortly after you, is do you think any of those preventable deaths occurred because of the lack of interoperability of data? Mm-hmm. Our job is to fix that, is to really fix it with a technical organization backed by hospitals and health systems who want a plug-and-play interoperability platform so the data really can lead to innovation and transformation. It's a boring technical job, but once enabled, and every other vertical market has this type of platform except healthcare.
Wow, I had no idea. See what we've done? Wonderful. Good luck keeping my ego in check now. Thierry.
So I'm Thierry Leclercq, and I'm a GE veteran. I've been in GE for 27 years. I run a business which is called Life Care Solution, which in a way, today we are not competitors. We collaborate, but do the same thing from monitoring, anesthesia, maternal infant care. We talked this morning, cardiology. And like you see, I'm based in Milwaukee, and I have a very strong Wisconsin accent.
Thank you, Thierry.
And I'm Rick Packer. I'm the leader of Zoll Medical. Zoll is one of the largest resuscitation equipment suppliers in the world. And unfortunately, being a defibrillator manufacturer, our products often come into play when everything has gone wrong. But we also are one of the largest suppliers of healthcare data systems and medical devices to the ambulance market, where often we are at the forefront of trying to save someone's life. And I would certainly say one of the things, Joe, that we have to do over time is to increase our participation by the EMS community, because it's such an important part of setting the right path for patient safety as patients come into the hospital.
Sounds wonderful. Maybe you can help us do that.
I will.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, when I first thought about holding this summit, and then one of the ingredients was to hopefully get all medtech companies to share their data, I contacted a few of my colleagues. These three gentlemen were the first to sign on: Stefan for Dräger, and Thierry for GE, and Rick for Zoll. And I just couldn't believe it, because you're right, many of us are competitors, yet we decided to work together for the greater good. Now I'm going to ask a little tough question. Maybe I'll put Thierry on the spot first, but so what have you done since you made the pledge to share the data?
So I thought I would have some time to think about that question and rebound on the other. I think for us, patient safety is 2 or 3 things. First, I was moved by the day. Every time I spend a day here and listen to the story, I feel even my commitment, the commitment of the company to really try to go after patient safety is even increased. So, when you go after that, and we are from the industry and talking from the industry after all the stories are always very difficult. So for us, so it starts with, the patient safety really starts with the product. Even before we share the data, which is how you design your product and how you train. We heard this morning a story from Africa. When you ship product, how you make sure that user knows how to use it. But let's think that this is granted, okay, or granted, and that we believe is good. So what we have done, I think there are two things that you have to look at. One is open system. How do you open more your system, your devices, to other vendors? And the first focus we had here was really using a protocol like DICOM or HLS7 to really interface with the EMR company. I will say this is the first step. Okay, you take process data or process images, and then you start to interface with EMR. And what's the value proposition? I have 2 or 3 examples, which in a way for us was a little bit difficult because we build up our business model on closed systems sometimes. It can be crazy to hear that, but that was at one point of time, how do we build up the business model? One, for example, was a maternal infant care this morning we discussed, which is the way today we can use our own perinatal digital system, which is in the department, and then you can connect to the AMR, but the trick is on one screen, you can document and see the fetal strip, which has a huge value because you see real-time information on the fetus, okay? That's one thing. The second thing we have done, same thing in cardiovascular, for example. In cardiovascular, we had, we have, again, a departmental digital solution that go into cardiovascular, and we connected on the interoperability of the medication to make sure that the medication at the point of care could be registered in the OMR and have one file. So that's one thing we have done on connecting better to the EMR. So it's one first action. Second action, and maybe you have seen that recently, is when you start to do that, you get data. Okay, and what you do with the data. And we have done something on, exporting more alarm, and alarm fatigue is one of the burdens in US. So we have done 2 things here. We did a clinical study to really understand the reporting of the alarm, the number of alarm, and we came up with 2 actions. One action is, because the excessive number of alarm, one was your algorithms. So how do you design better your product, in that case, for the arrhythmia, in order to decrease the number of alarms? But the second thing, what we realized, is most of the units everywhere in the world in the US, they're going to set up the same configuration for alarm. So what we did a reporting tool to ensure that a unit can just first take a look on how they set up the alarm, and then go back, look at the number of alarm, and then adjust the configuration to customize the alarm setting to the bed in the unit. Okay, so that thing that should help to reduce the preventable deaths because you have the caregiver focusing on really the patient. And the last thing I want to say, which is not in my space, which is in the imaging space, and that GE is a broad portfolio with the imaging space. And recently at RSNA last December, we opened what we call this GE Healthcare Cloud, where we can record any CT, MRI images. So what's the value? Think about that you have a cloud, and any caregiver from anywhere, from the hospital, outside of this hospital, can download images, give a second opinion, very quickly give a diagnostic, again, for better patient safety. And then at the end, to open that system, what we decided is to open that cloud to third party or even to academy to start, for themselves, to start to develop their own application on that cloud. So, we're not there, but I think we're trying to open with the EMR, try to put data, show the data, interpret the data, and then open the data to third party for developing their own apps. That's, wow. I will say what we've done.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Stefan?
Well, what we do after we signed the pledge is not any different from what we did before, since ever since I would say that our company exists for 127 years. It's kind of in our company DNA that our products support, protect and save lives, and so patient safety is extremely important to begin with, and the interoperability of our devices has been at all times our goal. So there's already around 20 years ago, we introduced the Medibus protocol, and the specification for that protocol is open, and we make contracts with and give licenses to many companies, including yours, to use this protocol. And the license is for free because we want the devices to interoperate. And the contract is only that the protocol is thoroughly followed. So it really works, just to make sure from a technical aspect that it does work. So that's one example. What we do ever since with the Medibus protocol. And another example I would like to mention is that around 15 years ago, we were thinking that it's not, when there was a lot of hype about what is it today? It's Industry 4.0. Back then it was probably 3.0 or 2. I don't care. There was the fully digital hospital and a kind of a hype that the hospital director could communicate with the ventilator and eventually control the valves in the ventilator. But we were thinking this is kind of a micromanagement that doesn't really support the patient. And it's far better to have a lateral connection between the experts, the caregivers that are at the same role throughout the country, or even better throughout the world. So we facilitated a network called Intensive Care Online that was using the only, by then, FDA-approved wide area network that the devices connect up with, and not only ours, every intensive care ventilator is invited to be hooked up to share with all other users the data, so we get to a kind of this data mining already in the early times. So that is something I would suggest is also in the future very much worthwhile.
Thank you very much. Rick, how about you?
Well, so the first thing I did when I came back from the first summit, Joe, was I had to talk my sales and marketing people off the cliff because I had not told them that I was going to sign this pledge, and they wanted to know, what on earth did Kiani convince you to do, Rick? Because in the EMS world, my competitors and I, we have to connect our medical equipment to each of our data systems. And often there's that playground act that goes on where you kind of hold your data and you go like that real quick. And I had just declared that I was going to give all of our data to our competitors, whether we got theirs or not. And so once I got them calmed down and convinced them it would be okay, because Joe said it would be okay. It actually has made life a lot easier because when people come to us looking for connection, we do not get into long discussions about strategy and how it will play. We just say yes. And we do our part, and they do their part, and eventually it'll come around and we'll get what we need. And so it's made the efficiency of the organization much better. I'm also happy to report that after about 15 years of trying to get one of the largest EMR providers to actually take the clinical record that we provide from the ambulance episode with the patient and move it into the EMR so it's there for posterity, for data mining, for QA, QI, we were finally able to get them to take that. And I used the data pledge as the moral high ground, right? And used that very effectively to get them to do the little bit of work. Because in our part of the medical business resuscitation's not that big. It's not as important as radiology or imaging or other things. So it was always in the bottom of their priority list. We got them to move it up to the top of the priority list.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ed, you were humble, you didn't say it, but your Interoperability Foundation is funded by some very prestigious hospitals, 10%, representing 10% of the US beds and purchasing power. How have you been able to use that to get companies like ours to want to go to the next step? Because the reason I'm saying this is I had seen in our industry for about 25, 30 years, everyone, whenever you ask for interoperability and standards, they use that as an excuse, I think, to say it's too hard, we're not going to do it. That's why we just said, just for now, agree to openly share your data if anyone needs it. You don't have to create or change standards. So you're taking on the next big problem, the next big hurdle of actually getting our data to play with each other. So how are you going to do it? How are you doing it?
Well, the hypothesis was, and Gary, Mary West are business people. So the hypothesis was what governance would drive transformation. So if you look at about every other vertical market that has transformed where data has been democratized, and excuse my military analogy, but where there's a command and control of that data, unless there's command and control of the data at the system level, the accidental deaths here, it's been very touching to ask the question, do you think if there would have been a command and control system that blood count would have been recognized? So the theory was, and listen, the reason why we stayed covert is it was a 50-50 shot whether or not this was coming together. So my task, like yours, like President Clinton challenged you, was can I get enough procurement power so that these guys can make decisions that have procurement backed? I thought due diligence was going to last a month because I thought the first 10 CEOs would tell me to get the hell out of their office. Just the opposite. Because we're modeling a governance where the CEOs that can make procurement come together, they bring their technical focal point, and they build a cooperative R&D arm under the 1984 Cooperative R&D Act. And the focus is on a reference architecture for plug-and-play interoperability, not a product. We don't want to compete with these great companies. But we want to be the champion to define what plug-and-play interoperability means. And really, it's 5 attributes. It's two-way, so that this wonderful EMR company is happy to take. They don't want to give too much, right? And as a result, these guys don't get much two-way data. We want it to be plug-and-play, so the cost of goods sold can come down. It has to be one-to-many. Because if you want an interoperable world and you cannot attest that you're not going to destroy 10 other devices, it should be standards-based, but standards can't be the reason not to do it. If it has to be a de facto standard backed by procurement, that's way better than the standards bodies. And it has to be trusted. The challenge, in all due respect, an individual vendor will never be trusted to be the focal point for interoperability. So we think this has to be in a nonprofit world. The cable industry does this beautifully. The nuclear energy does this beautifully. Telecom does it beautifully. So we're simply trying to build that governance. We're forming 3 coalitions. A coalition of companies to build the reference architecture. We've launched that last week. We're going to launch a coalition of device vendors, and then we're going to put on our suit of armor, and we're going to approach the EMR vendors. But we're going to approach them. Well, we're going to approach them with the point of care, a command and control system that can give and take to the EMR world. and to the clinical research. So I would say, unless I deliver enough procurement power, we'll shut the center down immediately, because this is too hard a job.
And I think a couple of thoughts about what you said. First of all, a lot of brave people here were first to sign the pledge. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give all my data, like Rick said, and now I can't trade anymore. So it would be wonderful, and this not because I want this to be something that's good for us, because eventually I hope this thing I'm asking you and your group to do will get everyone to do it, so there won't be a competitive advantage. But it would be great if these hospitals start saying, have you pledged to share your data? Because if you haven't, that's a point less for you winning our contract. If all else is equal, somebody else will get the contract, because, for example, Cerner signed the pledge, but Epic didn't, and so forth.
Yeah.
Is that something you think it's in your wheelhouse?
Oh, absolutely, but in a system way, right? Because just the device vendors agreeing to openly share data in the absence of a platform won't get the job done. I maybe look at it a different way, Joe. The commitment I want is for the health systems to commit to procure to the requirement, right? And if they do, then the requirement for, if they commit to a platform and commit to the two-way plug and play, then the requirement for the medical device that plugs into it is very straightforward. It's almost a condition precedent of the procurement. The question is, in a time frame that's financially relevant to the hospital and the device vendors, can this industry come together and create a platform that is as powerful as DOCSIS for the cable industry or the financial industry? And we're encouraged because we have the top largest nonprofit, the two largest for-profits. We have a pristine group of academic medical centers. And over time, if this model works, it's less than a headcount investment by each of the health systems, even the bigger ones. Yes. There's only 10 above 10 billion. It's a trivial financial amount. It's really a matter of, is it time for the coalitions to come together and put it on the map? Technically, I would make the point, any one of these companies could build a plug-and-play interoperability platform. What they can't do is fit it inside of a techno-economic system that's a viable business.
I agree. Thank you for what you're doing. So, little question for our panel that are CEOs of medtech companies. I started my own company, so I got to build it the way I wanted. And I know even though Stefan's company is 127 years old, I noticed when you took it over, you reshaped it to the way you wanted the culture to be. Most hospitals that we go to were there before we were born. So it's hard maybe start one from the beginning, just getting it perfectly right on the best ideas and ideals of today. But what could we teach our colleagues running hospitals? What could we teach them for the way we started our own, we devised our own companies that they could learn from to improve patient safety? Maybe, Stefan, I'll start with you and we'll go this way.
What could hospitals learn, and also with regard to patient safety? From my perspective is be ready to adapt or, if necessary, completely change the organization to reap the benefits that you want to get to. So it might require a slightly different business model, and it needs probably a different organization. So, and that it's not so easy because you have all these different stakeholder groups you need to handle through this process. I also really greet this initiative and very much looking forward to see it prosper, and I'd love to be part of that and see it grow. Because from my perspective, I see in the past few years that in decision making in hospitals, is more and more driven from a business or purely financial perspective, and the clinical perspective has lost out to some extent, and that is eventually not beneficial for safety, and also on the long term, not for the business. So if we can succeed with such initiative, it will come back, the business benefit through the back door, kind of. So I'd love to be part of that. And that requires to recognize the benefits and to implement some changes, the good stakeholder management.
Thank you, Stefan. Thierry, what could hospitals learn from GE Healthcare and how to make their hospitals safer?
Nothing. No, I think it's about the question you asked to be how can we scale it? Yeah. And if you look at I look at GE's trends, you will say it's management change, how to change, how to manage a process change, is operational effectiveness, is culture. That's really very strong asset from GE. So what we did, in fact, last year we created like a business called Partners. And their job is to go and see the CEO of the hospital and ask them, what problem do you have to resolve? And from that problem statement, really help the hospital to go through and identify the root causes and then the solution. And an example of what I think you can, in that case, consistently scale up the patient safety is we have developed an apps, which we call unit under pressure. And that unit under pressure is a unit in the hospital, and different units, where we are going to monitor real-time parameters coming from 5 different vendors. And this parameter can be from the staff, the people being sick that day, the patient acuity, the staff tenure, the code in the department. And with the specific apps, we take this data, we're going to weight that data to inform and alert the caregiver on which unit in the department, in the hospital, we need support. And it comes back to what you said, this command center, which is really how you use the data, how you connect the data, and how you help the caregiver to really access or help the unit under pressure at the right time, real time, and not when it's too late. Okay? And this is going to be, in fact, a release and announced next week with a big US academic site. And I think if you scale it that way everywhere, you start to get the momentum that you want to create, which is really around the process. And I think that's what GE can bring, that process thinking on because scalability is also process in my mind.
Thank you. And you guys used to go around teaching that process to people.
Yeah,
Are you still doing that?
Yeah, we're still doing
it.
Right,
yeah. Right. Rick?
So I think it's about trying to meet in the middle. I look at a lot of the commercial entities like ours, and the sustainable ones spend a lot of time trying to get their people to answer the call to a higher mission, right? So we're a resuscitation company. We count the number of lives that we touch, much like you do here at the Safety Summit. And we're trying to get people to use business tools, but to live something more than just a business objective. I often see at hospitals, it's an avocation to be a clinician. I mean, it is a higher calling, but it is also a process, and it is a bit of a factory in some cases, and business tools do apply. And so I see that I take my people and expose them to clinicians and hospital systems so that they can learn the mission aspect of it. And I think hospital systems and EMS systems can take the business aspects, much of which we talked about yesterday, Lean and Six Sigma, process checklist, apps, all of those kinds of tools. And you find that we're not so different in the end if we want to be successful over the long term.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for saying that right. Apps. It's actionable patient safety solution, not app. We have a question from the audience. I think this question is for you, Ed. Let me see if I can find, here it is, there's so many questions coming. This is from Amr Haidar, and his question is, or statement first, telecom and internet companies have figured out interoperability so I can make a phone call to anyone in the world. One big reason is the existence of an open source reference implementation source code like Linux and Apache. Are you creating open reference source code?
So it's an excellent question, and the obvious question, why don't you just adopt the Internet of Things, let data be consumed, and have a perfect industry? Every industry that has two-way plug-and-play one-to-many interoperability has come together and shaped the Internet to make it serve the market, right? So oddly enough, the coalition to develop the platform will consist of the cable industry, the defense industry, the Internet of Things industry, and yes, there will be one or two pure healthcare players that are struggling to do it today. So I think what then will stall it, if there's not enough procurement power to put an RFP out, and until there's the first procurement of a plug-and-play interoperability platform, then the Internet of Things and all of the telecom or cable infrastructure is too hard to adapt at a hospital system level. Because, your previous question, the discipline of a GE or a Dräger in the way they run their company, they have the privilege of focus, and their employees are trained to do what they do, versus a hospital who we're asking to be half IT people, half caregivers. So I think that we can benefit from other industries, but I don't underestimate the unique trust that has to be in this platform. That has been the reason why we probably don't have it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think this telecommunication example is a good one, and I think and again, I'm not a technical person here, but what I see the future is how do we create that telecom ecosystem, and it will come maybe not exactly from the way we're thinking the plug and play today. The plug and play is around protocol standards like DICOM, HLS7 or whatever. This is processed data. What's going to happen in the next 5 years, and you know better than me also, is that you're going to have sensor everywhere. Sensor everywhere. And these sensors are going to enable anything, continuous monitoring of the patient anywhere. In the hospital, miniaturization of the sensor are coming. That will happen. Then that plug and play that you discussed, that telecommunication is what you do with the data from the sensor. You want the real-time data. You don't want any more. You want the raw data. You don't want the processed data. And if you get this raw data, you create that ecosystem which could be exchanged by everybody. But the challenge is if you do that, if we do that, if you do that, if we do that, how we set up that plug and play, and what protocol will be for this raw data. So I think I see that on two levels. One is today, which is what exists. It's around this EMR. I agree the bidirection is very, very important. But then it will be different. You will be wire, I will be wire. I will be, And then what you do with this sensor and the data. And that's where I think you will get what's happening in the telecom. That's
a good vision.
And technology is moving there. You look at what's happened in the wellness. In the wellness side today, when everybody has a Fitbit and all that stuff, it goes to your Google or to your Apple or whatever, and you can read it. That will happen in our space, but with medical-grade type of devices. And that will be the real interoperability in my mind. And that's what we're working on. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I share and like your vision. The one thing we'll need from hospitals is for that interoperability and for that raw data to become effective is for all the devices in a hospital to be able to connect to the internet. Today, if you want to get interoperability, your device doesn't potentially know what you're going to plug into in the future, and it may have not been available when it did, but it can go to the internet, grab the actual protocol, bring it back, and load it on your PC so you can plug your camera in, your iPhone, or whatever you're plugging in. So somehow we got to also figure out, and hospitals have to figure out, not to hide behind HIPAA, but to say, look, there is a way to solve HIPAA. Of course there is. Let's go create this internet connection for everything that plugs in so we can get there. Now, we're running out of time. I've got 10 more questions. So obviously, I can't do it anymore. So why don't we just go around one more time, let you guys all say whatever you want to say to our team out there. Rick?
So I would just say, look, we are in this together. We come at it from slightly different views, caregivers, suppliers, but we all see the same thing. And there's a lot easier way for any of us up here to make a living than trying to sell medical equipment. We'd all be in Silicon Valley making the other kind of app, right? If
Yes.
that's all that mattered.
Minecraft.
That's right. So I think we just have to continue to work in a cooperative way, and I think ultimately we can get to zero, Mr. Zero.
Thank you.
I think it's about the culture. And maybe when you are the other side of the industry, you don't realize. So, for example, in our organization, we have 40,000 people. They wake up every day to do something for the patient. And in fact, when you do, with a story or whatever, recently we had our own what we call kickoff meeting or whatever, where we have employees coming and explaining exactly what you do here. So when it's deep in your organization, when the people, the engineers, the people doing the work, really think that way, how we can increase the safety of our product, it will be better. It can be better. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that, the industry has also a very genuine interest, and not just the CEO or the talk, the panel, and we want to please you, but the people who are doing it, they really think that way.
Thank you, Thierry. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure I have anything that could add to your tremendous goal by 2020, but boy, you've given me a lot of think about. If I put under the Center for Medical Interoperability, we will have a two-way, one-to-many, standards-based, plug-and-play, trusted platform by 2020, right? So, I love the finality of it, and the neat thing is these guys are going to bring the technology to bear. It's not the center employees that are going to invent this from scratch. So, aligning to that point in the future, and heeding President Clinton's advice that how do I get my next 10 CEOs to the table? What a great combination.
Thank you. And we're in on your plan.
All right.
You can count Masimo in and
Great.
Patient Safety Movement both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan.
Well, I look forward to see that coming into 2020, this trusted platform for interoperability and the appropriate necessary standards for that. And I would take care that we also take the regulatory bodies with us, because obviously for decision making, that data that the decision is based on needs to be validated and verified. I think that's possible to find a good compromise because there's such a great value in the operability and standardization that we together can convince and work with the regulatory bodies to actually make that happen. For that aspect, I'm also, I myself, a member of the board of DIN, which is Deutsches Institut für Normung, because so much belief in standards that I'm sure we can make it happen and not only have standards as a precondition, but actually achieve the target of zero preventable deaths by 2020, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. Thank you for a great panel.